IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. Most of last year, we saw these amazing pictures of the Himalayas being visible from way away, comparative pictures of Delhi before and after lockdown, and the impact it had on clean air. And everyone was talking about the benefits, how limited they were of having a lockdown on air quality. Well, there has been an update on that. IQAir, a Swiss group that measures air quality levels based on the concentration of airborne particles, PM 2.5, have come out with their findings, and they have reported that New Delhi continues to remain the most polluted capital for the third straight year in 2020. We'll have to see what happens in 2021, but as of now, New Delhi remains the world's most polluted capital. To discuss the findings of this report with me and the implications that those findings have for health and economy in India, I have Sunila Dixit. Hey, Sunila.
Hi, Shambhavi.
So let's just deep dive into this. Sunila, can you tell us a bit more about this report and its findings?
Yes, of course. So this IQAir is a Swiss organization, and it releases this report. And just 2 days ago, they released the report for 2020, and the findings are not very good for India, at least. So according to the report, India was home to 35 of the world's 15 most polluted cities. And the report gathered data for 106 countries for the concentration of particulate matter PM 2.5 in the air. And in 2020, New Delhi's average annual concentration of PM 2.5 in a cubic meter of air was 84.1, which was more than double the level of Beijing. So air pollution caused an estimated 54,000 premature deaths in New Delhi in 2020. This estimate was calculated by Greenpeace Southeast Asia based on the analysis of data put out by IQAir. And as you said in the introduction, people were talking about how Delhi's air became cleaner due to the lockdown because of people staying indoors and not using their vehicles as much, and due to the slowdown in the industrial activity. However, despite an 11% reduction in the PM 2.5 levels due to the lockdown, India still emerged as the world's third most polluted country after Bangladesh and Pakistan. So in 2020, South Asia endured some of the world's worst air quality on record. So even though there was some improvement in the air quality, but it was still not as good. And it still made India one of the top 3 most polluted countries. So while the air quality improved in Delhi during the initial months of lockdown, it went back to worse when farmers started burning stubble during the winters, which again increased the concentration of PM 2.5.
Just goes to show how much we have to do to actually improve our air quality and how many sustainable measures we'll have to take, not just acute ones, because we had expected something as stark as a lockdown to have had a significant impact on air quality. And it has. There has been some progress, but clearly not as much as is needed.
Right. And the irony of this is that we were appreciating how the air became cleaner due to lockdown. But people couldn't go out during that time. So I don't understand what exactly was the use of that clean air when we couldn't even actually enjoy it in the outdoor.
I'm sure that they breathe the same air in their homes, but we don't know. Obviously, a lockdown is not a measure that we can take lightly, and that we can even recommend to continue. But it just goes to show that something that impactful, that affected and influenced the lives of so many people, even that was not sufficient to actually improve our air quality. And that just goes to show that we look at pandemic with fear because it was here, it was now. And at one point of time, this decreased air quality is going to be something of a pandemic, is going to threaten people's life. It does now, but probably not at the scale that the pandemic had. But it will evolve to that situation. And if anything, the pandemic has taught us we really need to take measures now so that we don't end up in a similar situation a few decades down the line. Which brings me to my second question, Sunila. What are we doing? What are our regulations around protecting air quality?
Right. India has this Air Act, which was brought into effect in 1981. It is actually called Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, and it aims to enable the preservation of quality of air and control of air pollution. So it was enacted to fulfill India's commitments at the 1972 United Nations Environment Conference. And the law gave sweeping powers to state and central governments to take action to improve air quality, enforce pollution control measures, shut down industries that are violating the rules, and send polluters to jail. Now, under this act, National Pollution Control Board and State Pollution Control Boards were created as. However, the thing about this act is that it has been criticized for being toothless in the sense that it has not been implemented effectively. So, what happened is that almost zero cases have been filed under the Air Act from northern Indian states in the recent years, even though they face the worst pollution during winters. I mean, this is surprising considering the news that we see every time during winter season, how Delhi is facing pollution due to stubble burning, how Delhi is going through not just Delhi, northern states in general, how they are going through emergency period because of air pollution. And almost zero cases have been filed. So that is very surprising. Now, another problem with the act is that many sources of pollution are not covered. So it has mainly focused on large and obvious sources of pollution like factories and power plants, but it does not cover dispersed sources of pollution like landfills, agricultural fields, vehicles, and households, which have emerged as sources of pollution in the recent years. So the act is outdated according to many law experts. And it's not just the lack of cases, both courts and governments, they have not relied on the law to actually regulate the air pollution. Like, for example, the PUC certificates that we use for our vehicles, that it comes under the Motor Vehicles Act. The waste burning rules, they are issued under the Environmental Protection Act. So we are not actually using the Air Act to, control the pollution. So that these are the issues with the act that many law experts have come.
Right. And is there any indication that we might be actually taking some action to maybe change the law, improve its implementation, given the fact that we are just on the verge of trying to fight off a pandemic? And many experts have pointed about how similar the situations are. I mean, mask wearing could become the norm if this continues, and we've already seen people resist that idea. So clearly, if there's a time to act, it is now. So, do you think there has been any lessons learned so far?
Yes. So after many people pointed out, the Air Act is not being used effectively, the government came up with the National Clean Air Program to show its commitment towards fighting air pollution. So this program was launched in early 2019, and it calls on 122 cities across India to develop city level clean air plans so that they can implement mitigation strategies for ambient particulate matter concentrations. The NCAP, which is the National Clean Air Program, is envisioned as a comprehensive strategy to provide the state and union governments with a blueprint to combat air pollution. So it sets a target of reducing key air pollutants, which are PM10 and PM2.5, by 20 to 30% by 2024, with 2017 as the base year. So this 5-year action plan intends to create pan-India air quality monitoring network and generate citizen awareness across India.
So you spoke about this PM 2.5, which is obviously a particulate matter less than 2.5 microns, which is supposed to be really bad for the lungs and I think also for the heart. So a lot of people develop lung disease and cardiac diseases by breathing such as. So can you tell us
Right.
a bit about the effects of air pollution?
Yes, so it is not really news what air pollution can do to our health, but air pollution is responsible for a lot of respiratory diseases. Outdoor air pollution is known to have caused deaths due to, by causing ischemic heart disease, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, lung cancer, and acute lower respiratory infections in children. And similarly, indoor air pollution can also cause deaths due to some of the diseases that I mentioned before. Now, in 2012, air pollution was responsible for around 4.2 million deaths globally, which is a huge number. And what we need to consider here is that the health issues that come with air pollution are mainly present in vulnerable groups such as women, children, indigenous populations, and the elderly. The extent of outdoor pollution can act as a detriment to children's growth and development. And of the total number of deaths caused by the combined effects of household and ambient air pollution worldwide in 2016, 9% were children. So this shows just how children are vulnerable to pollution. And the exposure to high levels of pollutants affects lung capacity and predisposes children to respiratory problems later in life. And exposure to air pollution is known to have contributed to more than half of all deaths from acute lower respiratory tract infection in children under 5 years in low and middle income countries. So, one of the five leading causes of death in children under 5 years is actually acute respiratory infection. So, this just shows that, you know, air pollution may not cause mortality immediately, but it can have serious effects in the long term. And also, we need to look at the disparity between urban and rural areas when we talk about pollution. Now, in India, even till today, around 83% of rural households they use solid biomass fuels for cooking, and we know in most of the rural households, kitchens are run by women of the house. So this affects women and girls every day because they are holed up in the enclosed spaces, which allows pollutants to build up more than in the open spaces. And this extended exposure causes major health complications such as lung, heart, pulmonary disease, as well as stroke. And we need to also consider the fact that children under 5, they are always with their mother, like most of the time. So this affects children as well when households use biomass fuels. So we need to see the gender disparity, urban-rural disparity when we talk about the effects of air pollution on health.
Wow, and I'm supposing this all of this also leads to some kind of economic burden on India.
Of course, yeah. Well, if air pollution has effects on the health of population, it will also result in economic losses. Now, there was a study that was conducted by the Indian Council of Medical Research in collaboration with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it was released last year, where they studied the effect of air pollution on the economy of India. And what they found was the lost output from premature deaths and morbidity attributable to air pollution accounted for economic losses of 28.8 billion US dollars in India in 2019. And this accounted for 1.36% of India's GDP. And the economic loss as a proportion of the state GDP was highest in low per capita GDP states of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. And Delhi had the highest per capita economic loss due to air pollution, followed by Haryana in 2019. So again, we can see here that northern states are suffering the most. So it also speaks for how much the states are prosperous. States with low prosperity, I mean, I'm just talking about based on the GDP, are suffering the most from air pollution.
Right. And what would be your recommendations on how we can improve this situation?
I would say the Air Act needs to go through some changes, which has provisions for better transparency and accountability, which makes it compulsory for the government to put out data in public, so the public is aware of how their health is being affected, and this might make them take actions, to control the air pollution, to being more responsible citizens, and to hold government accountable. Also, we need to look at sources of clean energy. I mean, even electricity generation is known to contribute to air pollution because we burn coal for that, right? So maybe we can look more at sources of clean energy. Now, I know many people have said that, investing in renewable sources of energy is expensive when it comes to implementation. But I think we need to involve private sector here. The government needs to provide more incentives to private sector so that they can contribute to implementation of clean energy sources across the country, which will then eventually reduce the air pollution in the end. Do you have any other policy solutions that you can think?
Wow, if I could think of policy solutions to solve air pollution. But other things about obviously what stubble burning, and a lot has been said, and I think Pranay Kotastani covered it very nicely in one of his newsletters, where he spoke about how the regulation around when seeding can happen and when harvesting can happen has led to this problem. So I think that there's so many things that feed into air pollution,
Right.
and at the end, it is up to people again to change, which I think is like wishful thinking at the end of the day. So I think we have to take this one step at a time, and we have to start making some stricter laws, some penalties, because we can't. We if this is a time to rectify all of the issues that influence air pollution. If we don't do it now, it might be too late.
I just want to say that, we may not be able to see the ill effects of air pollution in the short term, but we always have to remember that it's going to affect us in the long term and even the upcoming generations. So we really need to act on it right now.
Yeah, and I think again, I continue to draw parallels between air pollution and pandemic for this reason. We saw the signs, right? We knew we have new diseases coming up in new geographies. We know global trade was leading to faster spread of disease. We knew all of that. We knew the effects of urbanization, of globalization. We knew the fact that staying in close touch with animals was going to lead for viruses to jump from animals to humans. The signs were all there. Experts had said for a long time that we would have a pandemic sooner or later, and we saw the devastating impacts it had when it actually came. But because in the short term there was gain that we could not let go of, we continued with our practices. We continue to behave in a way that benefits us now, than us having to compromise a little bit right now for future benefits. And if anything, the pandemic should tell us that if we do the same thing with air quality, it is going to hit us much, much worse than COVID 19 has. So it makes complete sense for us to act now and take responsibility for all the resources that we share. Thank you, Sunila, for taking us through the findings of the IQAir report. Thank you so much for listening into this episode of ATB, and do keep listening in for other episodes as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Taksha research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at takshashila_inst or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week. Syed, thank you so much for sticking with us. On the Paisa Vaisa podcast, Anupam was joined by Sujata Alawat, who spoke about women's credit behavior and about improving credit scores for better financial health. Gauri Devi Dayal was joined by Barkha Dutt on This Round is on Me. She shared her thoughts on present-day media and journalism and some of her experiences from the days of her reporting. On The Habit Coach, Ashton talked about how meditation is like getting engrossed and absorbed into an activity where you are free of other thoughts and focus on just one thing. On Agra Station Adulthood, Ritasha and Ayushi were joined by Supriya and Priyanka Joshi for an honest and heartfelt conversation about life as a woman in the 2020s. On the Filter Coffee podcast this week, Karthik invited Bala Srinivas, who has been an active mentor in the startup scene in India, and they discuss its various aspects from funding to government support. Our traveling professor Siddharth talks about this academic document called Statement of Purpose and helps us understand its concept and shares and some tips on how to draft it well. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, dear friends. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. Life, as you know, is a journey. And you and I, travelers, how can we celebrate this travel? I have a podcast for you, Begin the Journey. I share stories and moments from my life. Do tune in every Monday and Thursday to listen to my podcast on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from. Cheers.